His name is Ross, and he's representing Ruby. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, so I've been programming Ruby for about 2.5 years, started back then with 0 experience. So what you see here is the results of me playing around with Ruby, usually in the context of Rails, which means I don't know a whole lot of Ruby. I'm still learning. So some core concepts that I picked up in the last 2.5 years, which is long enough to pick up any goddamn thing, is every function call or operator call in Ruby really results in a method call on something. Now, what that something is really determines the context in which those methods get evaluated and really determine that code's meaning. So what the hell is that context? It's always an object. You can refer to it by self. Now, since this is Ruby and not Python, this is not explicitly passed into every single method. So as an example here, this balance method doesn't take any parameters whatsoever because what self is guaranteed by the fact that it's declared inside of this class. And this @balance is really an instance method that's defined, usually you'd see this in Python as self.balance. And another interesting thing to note here is that this assignment down below, this is actually a method call in Ruby since this is happening on an object. So I take a parameter and I pass it down, or I set my instance variable to it and I return. So what you really give up, this was one of my things I picked up in Ruby pretty early on, is you hand over knowledge of where the code that you're executing actually lives for the ability to write short code. So your options when you look at some code like the below and you try and figure out, hey, where the hell is that balance method? Where the hell is it defined? Where's its implementation? How do I get a hold of it? You can either dig up the docs for whatever the hell self returns if you set a breakpointer at that location. So you can take a look at self. Hopefully it's there. If it's not, you take a look at its included modules. If it's not there, you take a look at its parent. And then you repeat the process with its parent. If you're really, really lucky, RI will give you the information you need. Or if you get really very lucky, you can use You can use a method invocation, which is unfortunately running off the screen. What you're looking for here is source location. I'll put these slides up on the net. And ideally, that'll return you a pair of the file on disk and the actual line number where this method's defined. So again, that core idea in Ruby is write less, but do more, and hand over knowledge necessarily of what you're calling in the instance of the docs being correct, or it behaving in a manner which you would expect. So an example is the Ruby code for using a framework by the name of Sinatra, which is a web application framework. A lot of the Python micro-frameworks rip it off, as well as Express for Node.js. So this is what your Ruby code would look like. And down below, what you see in Python for, say, Flask or Bottle. I've played around with a couple of these. I've probably got the decorator wrong, but you're going to see something along those lines playing around with these two frameworks. The core things to keep in mind are the fact that your Python methods really need to take parameters in order for this to really work. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to really play around with your arguments, to my knowledge. You're also going to need to pass your response directly into something else. In Ruby, because this is a block, which I'll get to in a bit, the get method can actually take this guy and operate on its return value and do these things behind the scenes. So your users don't have to think about how to call things in the context of your framework. Things just happen fairly magically for them until they break it. So that block feature that I was talking about earlier. So what a block really is between this do and this first end that you see down below. What I'm doing here inside of account, which is an instance of Active Record base, is I'm starting a transaction. For anybody that's played around with Active Record or anybody that hasn't, this will actually execute the inside things in the context of a database transaction. This is one of those nice features you get in Ruby, is that I've completely abstracted behind this method call exactly what's happening behind the scenes and just told the user, hey, if you execute things inside of a block passed to this method, it's going to happen inside of a transaction in the database behind the scenes. So yes, you can make a mess with these, a great big mess, because both the callee and the caller determine your context and what you can call inside of this block. But the advantage is you get code that makes sense as long as you don't think too hard about it and as long as you don't use it too far outside of the context of how people plan things. Another nice handy feature of Ruby is that every statement is an expression, and every method or block returns the last thing that was evaluated. This can bite you in certain cases. Nice side effect here. How am I doing on time?
2:30.
Sweet. So I'll slow down a bit. So basically, the last value here is kind of what I was talking about before. Whereas before I had to wrap that in a call to response in the Python version of doing this kind of framework, I can just return that string directly. And the get method, which takes a block, which is effectively a multi-line lambda in Python, it'll do things to that return value of that block. And the user doesn't need to have any idea. It just needs to know what I need to return and maybe what you're going to do to it as a result. Another nice side effect of a method being able to take a block is you, as the person being called with a block, can determine when you call it and what its context really is, what that beast has access to, what you pass to it. This is a way in which you can limit the kind of mess your users can make with the code that they pass up to get evaluated to you. And finally, the Ruby guys have spent a very long time trying to shorten the amount of code that you need to get what you want. All of this code that I've stated earlier for this balance, which has an inside parameter and has an accessor down here, all of this can be replaced by a single method call.
1 minute.
Though trying to figure out where that actually is in Ruby is interesting. I'm still on a nice big quest to figure out exactly how that gets included into classes. But what this really determines is you get the exact same behavior, and you can override this later in Ruby because the last definition of any particular method wins. So, how not to shoot yourself in the foot. As I said before, often significance is attached to return values of blocks. This bites you a lot when messing with validation methods, for example, in Active Record. Beware that you don't evaluate the wrong thing last, or that the value that you're evaluating last is actually going to return the thing that you want and give you the behavior that you want. Also, there's very few control and branching structures normally in use. If, else, case, while. This is really due to the fact that a lot of things in Ruby are really method calls on some other object. For example, to loop over an array, you'd use the each method, the map method on that array, and loop over things that particular way and pass a block of the modification that you want to do or the things you want to return for each element in the list. We also have open classes, which means you can put any method in any class at any time. Here's some resources. They're really goddamn useful.
All right, we'll do a stretch break.